Beau Dade, who some of you may know from the Lotus Eaters, which is a podcast I go on sometimes, and went on the other day, in fact, was dropped from the Reform Party following a campaign from Hope Not Hate, who did a classic kind of smear job on him. Immediately, Tice capitulates and drops him from the party. Now, his comments did look a little bit fruity, taken out of context. I actually did the show. So I haven't done Lotus Eaters in over a year. By chance, I go on the show. By chance, I'm on with Beau and Callum. And I thought we were going to be talking about Jake Paul and Mike Tyson. Beau's like, oh, it turns out we're on the same show. Do you mind talking about boxing? I was like, I love boxing. Let's do it. I know everything about it. So I go on. Then the day before he gets dropped from Reform, I'm like, oh, no, I'm in the middle of another scandal. So I have to go on with Beau talking about how he got dropped. And he just came in straight away and said, I want to apologize to absolutely no one. And he was just like completely stood by what it said. He's like, I apologize for nothing. I said it was like Wolf of Wall Street when he goes, I'm not fucking leaving. Even though he had left, but it was the same kind of level of defiance. And so he was very defiant about it. Weirdly, I end up a minor part of the story. Someone sent me this here. I haven't even read the article, these hit pieces. It was in the Swindon Advertiser. It goes on comments about, so one of the things Beau said, I should say, was that Scotland was mainly, its main exports were Iron Brew and Smack. And it was a turd that should be flushed. Sorry, it's quite funny. He said, on comments about Scotland being a boil that must be lanced again and again, he said, I maintain that is funny. And no, I don't apologise. I forgot to mention one of their other main exports is tramps. It is my God-given right to be rude and dismissive about Scots and Welsh and Irish. His co-host, Nick Dixon, describes it as hilarious pub banter. So I'm in the Swindon Advertiser, which is an esteemed publication. It is up there. It's a Wall Street Journal type of level. And I went in there just going, yeah, that's slow. But isn't that quite funny? So here's the thing, Toby. Should he have been dropped? You look at his comments in context, as we did on the Lotus Eaters segment, they're not actually that bad. For example, they make it sound, Hope Not Hate, as if he's sort of saying that immigrants are a cancer or something. You look into it, he's saying that the various departments are a cancer on the country, and we need to do a melee and be like afuera and all that, and get rid of those departments. And the argument really to me is this realpolitik? Farage and Tice can't be seen to be extreme in any way. They're the moderate party. They're just a slight alternative to Tories. Or is it just capitulation to a group that hates us, is disingenuous, are bad actors, Hope Not Hate, they're communists, one of them is a former National Front member, and we shouldn't be rewarding this kind of behaviour and rewarding our enemies in a sense? Well,
before coming on the show, because you said you wanted to talk about this, I looked up the Hate Not Hope report about
Hope Not Hate.
Hope Not Hate.
There really is hate on Hope.
Hope Not Hate. And they linked to this now withdrawn piece on the Mallard. I hadn't heard of the Mallard, but they had an archived version, and I read it. And one of the defences that he made and you made on the show, I watched the segment on Lotus Eaters too, was that nothing he'd said wasn't already Reform Party policy. But it did sound like from this piece, and admittedly he wrote this piece I think in 22 before he'd become a Reform Party candidate, but he did seem to go beyond Reform Party policy. And in particular, he says he wants to remigrate hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions of people back to their countries of origin. And he does try and sort of, he says when he first proposes this, that this should be done without breaking the law, which sounds reasonably moderate. But then he says it needs to be accompanied by a policy of removing all superfluous legal restraints put upon the government, preventing it from carrying out a program of mass remigrations. ECHR ripped up, Blairite Supreme Court abolished, law firms who've been exploited and profited from the old system investigated, and its partners prosecuted for treason. Individual members of the police and the CPS who have conspired against the state should be firmly held to account. So it doesn't sound like he does want this remigration policy to be constrained by law, because any laws that do constrain it, he wants to scrap. That did sound like it went way beyond anything the Reform Party is currently advocating. They're not advocating mass repatriation of everyone who's migrated to this country since 1997, which seemed to be his policy. But also the language he used was slightly reminiscent of Katie Hopkins comparing illegal migrants crossing the channel in dinghies to, I think, cockroaches. And at the end, he does say, once Britain has suppressed its traitor class and rid itself of the foreign plague we've been diseased with. So plague, disease. Admittedly, he doesn't use the word cancer to describe migrants. He used that to describe people who've kind of colluded in kind of the policy of mass immigration over the past 20, 30 years. But he does use the word cancer repeatedly. And he also comes up with this rather authoritarian proposal, which is he wants to ban, completely prohibit various organizations which he thinks of as traitorous. Socialist Workers' Party, the Communist Party, Hope Not Hate, the Runnymede Trust, and then he kind of segues into the BBC, Channel 4, The Guardian, then the Mail Group. I mean, it's like getting more and more creeping towards us, actually, more and more kind of towards the centre. Slightly odd that he wants to actually prohibit, ban the BBC, the Mail Group. Hard to have much sympathy with that. Maybe some of it was said in jest, though this piece didn't read like it was kind of, supposed to be funny. I mean, it was a kind of a manifesto for how to deal with Britain's problems. And as I say, he didn't write it when he was a Reform Party candidate. It predated that. But yeah, I think in light of this, you can understand why Richard Tice wanted to expel him from the party. I mean, Reform are very anxious not to be branded as far right. They recently successfully complained when the BBC did brand them as far right. If they're going to, persuade people who voted Tory in 2019 to vote for them, which they have been doing quite successfully, I think they want to be very, understandably, disassociate themselves from people who are too extreme and are going to put off most mainstream voters.
A couple of things. One, I didn't mention that these things were Reform policy because I don't know. When I interviewed Richard Tice, I did swat up on the current thing, my other podcast. I did swat up on the manifesto, but I haven't looked at it for ages. So I never said on the segment these are politics. Okay, they did.
Who was it? Callum?
Callum, may have said that. I don't know if Callum said it, but I didn't say it.
Okay.
So, but I didn't know all the comments. You read out some that I didn't know about. Still, though, a couple of things. And the Mail, I did ask him about that. And I was like, the Mail as well. But the Mail, they're just all over the map. But I tried to ask a few things and push back a little. But fundamentally, it's still a tactical mistake. I've thought about it. I mean, I understand the squeamishness of Reform and everything. But then you go, what is the point of Reform? And I'll give you this little ex-post Richard Tice did. He said, so Reform UK and I seem to be being attacked by some lovely folk, meaning the opposite, on both the left and the right. Presumably that means we're talking common sense somewhere in the middle. And of course it doesn't mean that. It means you're being attacked by the left because they're your ideological opponents who will attack you no matter what, and they'll try and destroy you. I mean, Hope Not Hate have been, as you say, desperately trying to get not only a Reform called far right, not only the BBC, Hope Not Hate have been doing that, and they said proudly, well, the BBC may have capitulated, but we will always call Reform far right. Okay, so they're not the friends of Reform. And I said, and I didn't say this because I didn't want to attack a GB News colleague when I thought about it, but I thought about saying, and you're being attacked by the right for the immediate capitulation to a bog standard leftist attack. So this is the problem. I mean, and Nima Parvini, who's now being attacked as well by Hope Not Hate, following his GB News appearance, talks about it in terms of the friend-enemy distinction. Does that come from Buchanan, or does that come from the other guy, Michelle? This comes from one of the elite theorists. And the idea is you need to reward your friends and punish your enemies. You can't do the opposite. And so what we can logically take from this is that Tice is friends with Hope Not Hate and he's enemies with his own candidates and with people like Lotus Eaters, which is so crazy. And he immediately got attacked by Lotus Eaters and many other people. And it hasn't gone well for him online, as he's alluding to there, because they're supposed to be a right-wing party. They're not supposed to be another leftist party. Why are you capitulating to your sworn enemies who are communists? So they're extremists, and one of them was in the National Front, quite a big organizer in that kind of thing. So they're extremists with a background of extremism and now are communists. They live to destroy things like GB News, and now they've taken what Tice has done. Now they're going after Nima. I think they're going after Leo. Next it'll be me, no doubt. And they're going after GB News people. So we actually become more vulnerable because you've proved that their tactics work and you've given them a big reward for this. Why not just say, we're ignoring you, you're communists, of course you'll attack us, get lost. We're not even going to look into the details of it.
Well, a couple of things. First of all, it may well be that Hope Not Hate aren't planning to just do a succession of hit jobs on Reform Party candidates. It may be that they've shot their bolt, and therefore he's not rendering the Reform Party vulnerable by responding in this way to this report. I think it wasn't just about Beau, it was about 2 other Reform Party candidates as well. So it may be that he's not worried that it's going to open the floodgates for many more of these reports. But secondly, I think you're right that Hope Not Hate certainly don't have Reform's best interests at heart. They are the sworn enemies of anyone to the right of Jeremy Corbyn. But that doesn't mean, I don't think, that these kinds of criticisms, exposés, hit jobs can be safely ignored by Richard Tice. I mean, I think, you don't want to kind of play into the hands of your enemies by kind of providing them with these low-hanging fruit, doing nothing when, they're exposed. I think, it's a judgment call, isn't it? On the one hand, you don't want to kind of alienate your kind of core supporters by seeming to capitulate too readily to criticisms from, the far left. But on the other hand, you want to attract more reasonable, moderate, centrist people if you're going to win elections. And those sorts of people are likely, I would have thought, to be put off by, a policy of mass repatriation of people who've migrated to this country since 1997. And also, the language describing immigrants as kind of symptomatic of a disease, as a plague, and so forth. It feels too reminiscent of a kind of hard right politics that we left behind in the 70s and maybe in the early 80s. And so, difficult position for Richard Tice, and maybe there should have been some more of a due process that people like Beau were put through, and they were given an opportunity to defend themselves. I mean, that doesn't usually happen in parties, because in politics everything happens so quickly, and you have to make fast decisions. So there's never usually much due process whenever something like this, a scandal like this blows up. And we're often approached the Free Speech Union about these issues. We talked about it before. What about free speech? Why are people being cancelled within political parties? But political parties, I think, have to have a bit more latitude than other organisations, because they do have to have a party line and message discipline, and if people stray too far from that, then it can damage the brand and make it difficult to get elected and so forth. But I think one of the interesting things about this is it came up during the kind of first wave of anti-lockdown protests. I remember going on some of those protests and being quite disappointed to discover that there were kind of some pretty odd, wacky people on those protests. It wasn't just people protesting about the lockdowns, it was people protesting about 5G, people who were against all vaccines, not just the COVID vaccine. It was a lot of kind of cranks and weirdos and tinfoil hattists. Maybe that's a slightly disparaging way to describe them, but it's like, if we're going to create a successful political movement here, you have to have some border policing. You can't just let anyone turn up and be kind of characterized as being typical of this anti-lockdown movement, because, it'll be easy to dismiss us as cranks and weirdos. But the idea of border policing, I would have thought, someone like Beau would understand that. That seems to be one of his kind of big things. So, he shouldn't he be able to grasp that, if you're going to create a cohesive common identity within a kind of organisation or a group, a political party, you need a bit of border policing. You need to say to some people, sorry, you can't come in. And if they come in, you need to say, sorry, you got to get out.
I think that's quite a funny joke. I don't think it holds up as an argument. I think it'd be funny if Tyson had said, I'm just policing the border. That would have been funnier. But I don't think it actually stacks up, because, of course, there's a big difference between the border of our country and a political party that's supposed to represent the people, the unspoken for people in this country, but actually is failing to in doing this. A couple of things. Schmidt, by the way, is the friend-enemy distinction. I got it wrong. I couldn't remember who it was before everyone tweets me, as if that's going to be the thing they mentioned. But it's the other thing I want to mention. Due process. Yeah, there should have been much more of a process, because why capitulate immediately? You've just looked at it, you've gone, oh yes, Hope Not Hate, it's probably correct then. They're not out to just get us at all costs. I won't even really bother checking this story. I'll just bin you off immediately. Where's the process? Labour, a party who's about to take power, far more scrutiny on them, particular scrutiny about anti-Semitism. Even they defended the crank guy in Rotherham more than Tice defended Beau. I mean, he said, oh yeah, Israel probably let October 7th happen. They initially defended that guy. So even Labour will at least make a more staunch defence than Tice, who's not even in power, who's a brand new party, far less at stake really than the Labour Party, who have been specifically criticised on anti-Semitism. Even they defended more than Tice managed to defend Beau. I think he could have at least done one round of defence.
Right. But do you think Labour were therefore right to defend that guy?
I'm saying there's an element to where at least they're being a bit tougher and a bit more pragmatic about the reality of politics, which is the other side will try and do everything they can to attack you, and you have to defend yourself. And sometimes you have to sort of sacrifice one, and Starmer's had to sacrifice people to try and see more mainstream, particularly because of this anti-Semitism thing. But you don't want to do that. You don't start with that as your first move. So I think it's very weak, and I think it's whose vote have they gained? You might say they have gained votes. They've lost my vote. They've lost probably lots of people's votes on who I know. So, I mean, they've lost candidates, and they've lost obviously Beau's, but they've lost all the Lotus Eaters' votes.
Well, I think so. When something like this happens, it's lose-lose. It's not a question of gaining anything. You've got to decide which is the least damaging course to take, and that would have been the calculation, I think. Not that actually binning him would have actually won them votes, but it would have done less damage than keeping him.
So you think it's done less damage? I mean, what is the point of reform? One has to ask at this point. Obviously, there's sort of they're very light sort of Thatcherite party anyway. I said a few weeks before this, they're good banter, but they're not really radical for what we need at this point. Radical, I didn't mean in some, crazy sense. I just meant in terms of the change we need. They're just another Tories who are, a bit better. They got Lee Anderson. They keep poaching Tories. So they're just going to be the new right of the Tory party. But there's a certain point where you become so moderate that you go, well, we already have 10 parties like that.
Well, in order to kind of become credible enough to pose a challenge to the Tories, I think they do have to shave away some of these rougher edges. And, one of the ways in which they can become more of a credible challenger party is by attracting disillusioned Conservative MPs like Lee Anderson. And it's going to be much harder to do that if there are people like Beau saying these kinds of things, standing as Reform Party candidates. I think finally, their hope must be, even though both Nigel Farage and Richard Tozer have ruled it out repeatedly, their only real hope of winning any seats at the next general election is if they can enter into some kind of electoral pact with the Tories. I think that's pretty unlikely. The Tories are unlikely to do it, but I think in their heart of hearts, Tyson Farage realise that and probably have one eye on that as the big prize. I think that's one of the reasons Farage agreed to step down in various seats in 2019, even though the Tories didn't offer them anything in return. It was like saying, we're people you can do business with, we have a common cause, but they're not going to be able to enter into any of those even informal non-aggression pacts with kind of local Conservative associations if there are people like Beau saying this kind of thing, standing as Reform Party candidates in other constituencies.
Although Farage swore never to do that again after that, because he felt betrayed and it was not popular amongst the grassroots. I thought he was not going to do that again. I don't know. Yours is all very pragmatic, Toby, but the thing is, what's the point of it? We just end up with the Tories need to be destroyed. Everyone admits that now on my side of things. And Reform are now just saying we're just another Tory, so they render themselves pointless. I think you're saying they have to be pragmatic. I think it's naive though on the other side. I think it's naive about the way politics is played now. I think maybe we'll talk about Owen Jones later. He's leaving Labour. I think things are getting more polarised, and I think it's naive to respond to your opponents give them any credulity. And I don't know. I don't see how they win from it. I see they've lost quite badly from it. I don't really see the gain. And like I say, at least defend your candidates a bit more. Check in what was said. Was it that bad? Can it be a suspension or can it be a telling off? Does it have to be immediately just dropping? I just think it sends a terrible message. Anyway, certainly all the Lotus people have taken it to mean we're not your party. We don't have your back. We don't like people like you. Mainly they're not extreme people. They're very smart people. Carl's very smart. Callum's very smart. They're all smart. They're all concerned about the country. The extremists are the people who've had ridiculous levels of immigration to the country at absolutely unprecedented levels. They're the extremists. Lotus Eaters are just normal English people who are concerned, or British people. I
think even Beau said this during the studio discussion you had with him. Reform doesn't feel like the natural home for the kind of Lotus Eaters crowd, and some kind of bust-up was probably inevitable. It's going to happen sooner or later.
Yeah, well, there is that, I suppose. But I don't know. I just think they could be a bit less wet, but there it is.